There is a number you check sometimes when no one is around, and for a moment before you even look at it, your body already knows what it will find. Not because you forgot what you spent, because some part of you has quietly stopped expecting things to be different. You have tried budgets before. You have tried motivation, promises to yourself, a fresh start on a Monday that faded out by Thursday. And still, somehow the same patterns return, as though your bank account were less a record of your choices and more a mirror of something older, something you have not yet looked at directly. This is not a script about getting rich quickly. It is not a promise that your circumstances will transform overnight, or that saying the right words will summon money into your life. It is something slower, and in some ways harder to hear. Your financial life is not separate from your inner life. It is shaped by it, hour by hour, decision by decision, in ways that are easy to miss because they feel so ordinary. Tonight, we are going to look at what is actually happening beneath the numbers. Perhaps you have noticed that money problems rarely feel like math problems when you are living inside them. They feel like shame, like exhaustion, like a low, steady hum of anxiety that follows you into rooms that have nothing to do with money at all. You may find yourself avoiding the very thing that could help you, not because you are lazy, but because looking closely at your finances means looking closely at years of decisions, some of which you are not proud of. There is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from managing scarcity, real or imagined, for a long stretch of time. It changes how a person thinks. It narrows the mind toward survival, toward short-term relief, toward whatever will quiet the discomfort fastest, even when the quieting costs more later. Sometimes the mind builds a story to protect itself from that discomfort. The story might sound like, I am just not good with money, or this is simply the family I was born into, or people like me do not get ahead. These stories are rarely spoken aloud, but they operate quietly in the background, shaping what feels possible before a single dollar is even earned or spent. And here is the uncomfortable part. A story repeated long enough stops feeling like a story. It starts to feel like identity. And identity, more than willpower, is what actually governs behavior over time. There is a quiet law of personal growth that many people sense but rarely name directly. Your financial life does not change because you found better information. Most people already know on some level that spending less than they earn matters, that debt compounds, that patience with money tends to outperform impulse. The knowledge is rarely the missing piece. What is missing more often is the internal shift that allows a person to actually live differently than the identity they have quietly accepted for themselves. Consider what happens when someone believes deep down that they are bad with money. Even if they read a book on budgeting, even if they download an app to track their spending, some part of them will still find a way to prove the old identity right. Not because they want to fail, but because the mind has a strange loyalty to what feels familiar, even when familiar is painful. A new habit that contradicts an old identity creates a kind of internal friction, and most people, without realizing it, resolve that friction by returning to the identity rather than the new habit. This is why financial change so often requires something deeper than a new spreadsheet. It requires a person to become someone slightly different before the numbers will follow. This does not mean money is only a mental exercise disconnected from real circumstances. Wages are unfair in many places. Costs rise faster than income in many lives. None of this is being denied. But within whatever circumstances a person is given, there remains a narrower, quieter space where daily choices are still made, where a version of self-respect is either practiced or abandoned, where a small promise to oneself is either kept or broken. That space is smaller than we would like, and it is also more powerful than most people ever test. There was a man named Daniel who drove a delivery van 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, weaving through traffic with a phone mounted on his dashboard buzzing with route updates. He was 34 years old, and if you had asked him, he would have told you he worked hard, and he did. He would also have told you that no matter how many hours he put in, money never seemed to stay. It arrived on Fridays and disappeared in ways he could not fully account for by the following Wednesday. He was not reckless. He was not chasing luxury. He simply had never learned, in any real sense, how to look at money without flinching. Each night after his shift, Daniel would sit in his van for a few minutes before going inside, scrolling through his phone, half watching videos, avoiding the quiet that would come the moment he turned off the engine. He told himself he was resting. In truth, he was avoiding a version of himself he did not want to face, one that felt behind, one that compared his life to friends who seemed to be moving forward while he stayed in place. He carried a private belief, never spoken to anyone, that he simply was not the kind of person things worked out for. The shift did not begin with a windfall or a miracle. It began on an ordinary Tuesday when Daniel, out of something closer to exhaustion than inspiration, sat in his van after his shift and instead of opening his phone, opened the Notes app and wrote down every single thing he had spent money on that day. Not to judge it, just to see it. It was uncomfortable. There was a coffee he did not remember buying, a subscription he had forgotten he was still paying for, a late fee from a bill he had meant to pay days earlier. Nothing dramatic, just small, quiet leaks. The kind that rarely feel urgent enough to fix, the kind that add up precisely because they never feel urgent. He did this again the next night and the next. Not perfectly. There were days he skipped it entirely, evenings when he was too tired to care, weekends when old habits pulled him back toward numbing rather than noticing. But something had shifted in the smallest possible way. He was no longer avoiding the truth of his spending. He was simply looking at it without the flinch that used to come automatically. A few weeks in, Daniel made one more small change. Instead of checking his bank balance with the familiar tightening in his chest, bracing for bad news, he began checking it at the same time each morning, calmly, almost like reading the weather. He was not trying to control the number through fear anymore. He was simply staying informed, the way a person tends a garden rather than panics over it. This single shift, checking without dread, began to quietly repair something in him that budgeting alone had never touched. There were setbacks, a car repair he had not planned for, a month where an old debt resurfaced and swallowed nearly everything he had managed to set aside. The old Daniel would have taken this as proof that trying was pointless, that people like him did not get ahead. But something in him had changed just enough to respond differently this time. He did not abandon the small nightly habit. He kept writing things down. He kept checking the number without flinching. Slowly, almost invisibly, a small cushion began to form beneath him, not large, not life-changing in a dramatic sense, but real. A few $100s that had never existed before, sitting quietly in a separate account he had started almost by accident. The deeper change was not the money itself. It was that Daniel had stopped being someone who avoided the truth of his life and become someone who could sit with it, calmly, night after night. The external number moved because the internal posture moved first. There is a kind of stillness that financial anxiety makes difficult to access. When the mind is constantly calculating, constantly bracing, it becomes almost impossible to hear anything quieter underneath the noise. Perhaps this is part of why so many wisdom traditions, across very different cultures and centuries, return again and again to the same instruction in different words. Be still, listen. Do not let fear make your decisions for you. This is not a suggestion to ignore your circumstances or pretend they do not matter. It is something closer to this. Anxiety convinces a person that constant vigilance is the same thing as control. Often it is not. Often it is simply exhaustion wearing the mask of responsibility. There is a different kind of attentiveness available, one that is steady rather than frantic, one that can look directly at a difficult number without collapsing into panic or despair. Perhaps some seasons of financial struggle are not only asking you to work harder, perhaps they are also asking you to become someone calmer, someone more honest with yourself, someone capable of sitting in a quiet room with an uncomfortable truth without needing to escape it immediately. There is an old idea, present in many spiritual traditions, that surrender does not mean giving up responsibility. It means releasing the illusion that fear itself is doing something productive. A person can act with full effort and still release the compulsive gripping that mistakes worry for progress. I am learning to look at what is true without flinching. I no longer confuse fear with wisdom. These are not magic words. They are simply reminders, said quietly, of a posture worth returning to. You may have years behind you that feel wasted. Money spent that cannot be unspent. Opportunities that closed while you were distracted by survival or fear or simply not knowing better at the time. This is not being denied and it will not be minimized here. But there is a difference between mourning lost time and being permanently defined by it. Regret, left unexamined, tends to calcify into identity. Regret faced honestly can instead become responsibility, which is a far more useful thing to carry. Nobody is coming to manage your daily decisions for you. Not the market, not a windfall, not a rescue arriving from somewhere outside your own life. This can sound harsh, but it is also quietly good news. It means the small decisions available to you today, the ones nobody else will witness, still belong entirely to you. The choice to check the number without flinching, the choice to write down where the money actually went, the choice to keep one small financial promise for 7 days, even when nobody would notice if you broke it. I keep the promises that rebuild my self-respect, even the small ones nobody else will see. This is not a slogan meant to inspire a burst of temporary motivation. It is closer to a discipline, something practiced daily quietly the way a craftsman returns to the same simple movements until they become steady. There was a woman named Madam C.J. Walker, born in the American South in the years following the Civil War, into a family with almost no property and few opportunities available to her. She worked for years as a laundress, earning barely enough to survive, long before she ever built the business that would eventually make her one of the most successful entrepreneurs of her era. What made the difference was not a single lucky break. It was a long accumulation of small, disciplined decisions, reinvesting modest earnings, learning her craft carefully, building relationships methodically, refusing to treat her circumstances as a permanent verdict on what was possible for her. Her success did not arrive because scarcity disappeared. It arrived because she kept making steady, disciplined choices inside difficult circumstances for years, long before the results became visible to anyone watching from outside. If you feel ready to explore this work more deeply, there may be something below that can quietly support your next step. There is an old story told in different forms across many cultures about a shopkeeper who kept two jars behind his counter. One jar was visible to every customer, sitting on the shelf, and coins went in and out of it constantly throughout the day. The other jar sat hidden beneath the floorboards, out of sight, and into it went only a small, steady portion, set aside deliberately, almost too small to notice on any single day. Years passed, customers came and went, some prospering, some struggling, all watching the visible jar as though it told the whole story. But it was the hidden jar, filled slowly and consistently, unseen by anyone, that eventually determined whether the shopkeeper could survive a difficult season, help a neighbor in need, or begin something new when the moment arrived. The visible jar showed activity. The hidden jar showed discipline. Only one of them, in the end, was building anything that would last. Your subconscious mind is in many ways built on repetition rather than logic. It does not evaluate your financial habits the way a spreadsheet would. It simply notices what you do again and again, and over time, it begins to treat that pattern as normal, even as identity. A person who repeatedly avoids looking at their spending is not simply failing to budget. They are quietly teaching their own mind that looking at money is dangerous, something to be feared rather than examined. A person who repeatedly tells themselves they are bad with money is not merely describing a fact. They are rehearsing a belief, and beliefs rehearsed often enough begin to shape which opportunities a person even considers pursuing. This works in the opposite direction as well. A person who begins even imperfectly to look calmly at their financial reality, who keeps small promises about saving or spending, who speaks to themselves with steadiness rather than contempt when they make a mistake, is quietly teaching their subconscious a new pattern. Not that money will now arrive effortlessly, simply that they are someone capable of facing their financial life honestly, someone whose word to themselves means something. Over months and years, this shift in self-perception tends to produce very different decisions than the old identity ever would have allowed. This is the deeper task beneath every budget and every plan. Not simply to chase a different financial outcome, but to practice becoming the kind of person capable of sustaining it. A person who saves consistently is not defined by a single act of saving. They are defined by having quietly proven to themselves, again and again, that they are someone who follows through. I am someone who can look at my finances without shame. My past spending does not define my future decisions. I choose steady action over anxious avoidance. Discipline for me is a form of self-respect, not punishment. I trust myself a little more with every promise I keep. Here is one action available to you before tomorrow ends. Tonight or tomorrow morning, take 10 quiet minutes, without your phone nearby, and write down the specific belief about money that you inherited early in life. Not a general idea, a specific sentence, something like, "There is never enough," or "Money causes conflict," or "People like us do not get ahead." Write it exactly as it sounds inside your mind without editing it to sound more reasonable. Do not try to fix it yet. Simply see it clearly, on paper outside of yourself, perhaps for the first time. This single act of naming a belief tends to loosen its grip in ways that vague good intentions rarely manage. What has operated invisibly for years becomes, suddenly, something you can actually examine, and eventually, something you can choose to keep or release. If this way of thinking resonates with you, there may be additional guidance below worth exploring at your own pace. You do not need to transform your entire financial life tonight. That was never being asked of you. What is being asked is smaller and in some ways harder. Stop unconsciously repeating the pattern that has been quietly hurting you. Look at the number without flinching. Write down what is actually true. Keep one small promise even when no one would know if you broke it. The old fear may still visit you sometimes, late at night, when the account feels too small and the future feels uncertain. Let it visit without letting it decide everything. You have already begun something tonight simply by staying present for these words instead of turning away. the way you may have turned away before. Somewhere ahead of you is a version of your life that is steadier than this one, not because circumstances suddenly softened, but because you did not. That version begins quietly tonight. Become the steady one.